Hi, I'm Hayley Solage, and today I want to share with you a message about God. The message is very, very simple. God is faithful, even when it hurts. He is faithful, and there can be no argument because he has consistently demonstrated his faithfulness to mankind throughout history. If you look back, he was faithful to the children of Israel, and he delivered them out of bondage. He was faithful in the desert. He provided for them day and night. He was faithful in their crossing over the River Jordan and coming into the promised land. And he was even faithful when the people were taken into captivity. The most clear representation of the faithfulness of God was when he sent his only son, Jesus, to die upon a cross for us. When he parted with his flesh and his blood, and he allowed the blood of his son to be sacrificed, to be shed for us. That was the ultimate demonstration of his faithfulness. Now, in the biblical sense, the word faithfulness is the Hebrew word emunah. And I want to read to you what the word emunah means. It means firmness, stability, faithfulness, fidelity, conscientiousness, steadiness, certainty, that which is permanent, enduring, steadfast, and established. Are you starting to get a picture of what it really means to know that God is faithful? He is not changing. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And that faithfulness is not dependent upon what we do or what we don't do. He remains the same. His heart of love remains the same. He is faithful. Now, I want to tell you a story about a man who had a son. This man worked for the railways. His job was to lift and lower a bridge. That bridge, when it was lifted, allowed the big ships to pass through, and when it was lowered, allowed the trains to go across. This was his job, and he faithfully did his job every single day. Now, it was school holidays, and he decided that he'd take his son to work with him. He wanted to show him what he did. And this day, the son was very excited. He was watching with anticipation. And a big ship started to approach. And so the man pulled the lever and the cogs started to turn. And the bridge slowly lifted up. And as that big ship passed through, the man waved and his son waved and he smiled at the captain, and the captain smiled back his gratitude that he could safely pass through. Well, it wasn't much later that he noticed that a train was starting to approach. And the man, as he always did, walked over and started to pull the handle, the lever that would lower that bridge down. And as the lever started to turn, he noticed that his son fell into the cogs of the machine, and he immediately pressed the stop button. The train continued to approach. And the man, unable to reach his son, had a dilemma. If he lowered that bridge, he would be killing his son. Yet if he chose not to, this train full of humanity would go over the edge and perish. Is it not the same for God? Was it not the same for him? That he could choose to do nothing. He could choose not to build a bridge between heaven and humanity. He could choose to stand back and to watch us perish. But no, God, in that moment of decision, had to be responsible. And you know what decided this man? This man who was there looking at his son caught, his son about to be mangled to death. The son said to the man, "Daddy, pull the lever or the people will perish." And isn't it the same message that Jesus said to the Father? If this cup could be taken from me, take it from me. but not my will, but yours be done. In that moment, when Jesus hung on the cross, he was saying, Father, pull the lever or the people will perish. Take a moment to think about the faithfulness of God. If you're a parent, you will know how devastating that decision must have been for that man. And you'll also understand that even as he pulled the lever and he watched his son die, and the bridge lowered and the train still approached and the people went past and they waved and they smiled and they said, thank you, thank you. They had no understanding of the cost, the personal cost to the man for their safety. And sometimes I think we have no understanding of the personal cost to God for our safety, for our eternity. God is faithful. Jesus demonstrated his faithfulness when he came in the flesh, when he left heaven and gave up his divinity to walk as a man on the earth, to eat, to drink, to suffer, to bleed, to understand the full range of human emotion even as we bleed, even as we suffer. He made that personal sacrifice for us. And God demonstrated his faithfulness in allowing Jesus to come. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever should believe in him would not perish, but would have eternal life. The book of Hosea is the story of a prophet who God asked to marry a prostitute. Now, if we look at the society of the time, for him to go and marry a prostitute would have been to sacrifice all of his standing and his reputation. And not only did he have to sacrifice it once, but Hosea married her and she went back to her ways. And he went and he remarried her, he rescued her, he paid for her, he brought her out of her prostitution again, and she still went back to her ways. 3 times Hosea reached out to his wife. And this is the epitome of the love of God. How many times have we prostituted God? How many times have we turned our back on him? How many times have we run off and done our own thing? We've run off and made something else an idol in our life. But God, like Hosea, is faithful. He does not change. He is steadfast. He is firm. He is the rock upon which we can build our life. God's faithfulness is not in question, but is ours. Are we giving him the same level of commitment back? Are we being conscientious? Are we being steadfast in our love for him? Are we being faithful to him when it hurts? Often we lose sight of God's faithfulness. And it's when these times of pain and suffering, of being done wrong by, come into our lives. These are the times when we need to be more faithful. These are the times when we need to reach out to God and ask him to supernaturally empower us and keep us steadfast, keep us established, keep us rooted and grounded in him. There was a time in my own life when I went through depression. It was after I had my 4th child. We'd come through a really tough time. I had 4 children under 5. I was exhausted physically. We were in extreme financial pressure. I had been rejected by ministry team that I worked with and had given my heart and soul to. It was like everything, and I mean everything, it was stripped away from my life. Everything I loved, everything that was precious. And what resulted was I spent days, in fact months, fighting with suicidal thoughts, fighting inside myself, because the internal voice in me knew this was not who I wanted to be, it was not who I thought I was. But there was an oppression on my life. And it was during this time that I realized the faithfulness of God. I realized that though I may leave him, he does not leave me. He is strong. And there was a vision that my husband had some months before this came into my life. And in that vision, he said he saw me going down into this pit, and I had around my neck this glowing light, and I was saying to myself, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. And I was repeating it over and over, and it was like I wanted to believe it. I really wanted to believe it, but it was not my truth at that time. But months later, as I came out of that pit, and he saw this in the vision, he saw me rising up, and I was covered in gold. And I was saying, the Lord is my front and my rear guard. Whom shall I fear? That's the knowledge that God is faithful. He is my front and my rear guard. Whom shall I fear? Who is there to fear if God is looking after you? He is faithful, conscientious, steadfast, firm, able, true, honest, pure, just, noble, righteous. And he is standing here and he's asking, are you going to trust me? He's asking, are you going to be faithful to me even when it hurts? Now, when I look back over my life and I think about some of the amazing things that have happened in my life, some of the real miracles, I think of the time when I was an 18-year-old and I was working in Sydney, and I was driving this beautiful Telstar car. It was my boss's car, and I used to go and get the mail with it every day. And I remember getting in that car one day and I said to God, I closed my eyes, I said, God, I would so love a car like this. Well, 10 years later, my girlfriend had a Telstar, a beautiful silver Telstar, and it was top of the range, auto everything, and a turbo. It was a gorgeous car. And I remember she asked me if I would look after her car while her husband and her moved over east, and I was to put it on a train in three weeks and send it to her. Well, as I left the airport, I went out into the car park. I had an envelope from her, and I assumed inside the envelope was the keys and some money to get out of the car park. But as I opened the envelope and I pulled out this letter, it said that God had spoken to them 3 months previously, and that they were to give me their car, their Telstar. As I stood in the car park, and excuse me for being emotional, but it just touches my heart how beautiful our Father is. Well, as I stood in that car park, I wept like a baby. Why did I weep? Was it because I had a car? The car did not mean that much. It was that God is faithful, that even though it took a decade, he answered my prayer.